Alright, another draft physics video production. Comments mostly the monk thing. The subject is basically redshift and how you create it with moving objects. Things moving on a train. On a moving train. Things moving on a moving train. Something like that. Anyway, let's start here. Star of Sagittarius, who's a lunatic and an idiot. Quantum mechanics is singular particles moving. Singular. It's a redundant statement. A particle has to be a single particle, or you call it particles. Then they're not singular. Then they're a group of particles. And this is idiotic. Conventional physics saying it's a particle theory is like saying flying pigs, okay, is pigs. Flying pigs wouldn't be called pigs. They'd be called something else because they're too different from pigs. If you have a particle that has all these properties, it creates wave function, it's got radar, it's got all this crap, it's got ESP with its other particles, it's not a particle anymore. It's something complete. It's a battleship, okay? It's something. You don't call battleships particles. You don't just say it's a boat. When it has radar and nuclear missiles and guidance systems and computers, you don't just say boat. So fuck you, stupid fuck. Really, I've had my fill of your bullshit, fuckhead. Just fuck off. You're a rude, obnoxious, trolling piece of dirty, smelly, rotten, dumbass shit. So fuck off. He's made gratuitously stupid remarks in the past, so I'm just saying he's a person non grata. You can go eat shit for all I give a fuck. All right. So Mr. Keebler said, even if you hold someone's hand throughout the explanation, they are blind. They're not blind. They're just they're looking for an excuse not to believe. So they're just trying to tear it down. They're looking for they'll grasp at any tear down straw, just like Richard Feynman comparing photons to raindrops. It's just a desperate effort to naysay, nitpick, and destroy because they don't want to have to admit that, oh yeah, they've believed in a bunch of horse shit. So they want to rationalize the horse shit. They're defending their horse shit desperately. But yes, it is idiotic. Well, anyway, so the monk guy did respond to that, but apparently there's nothing in the spam folder. I mean, it says 90. If it's what was it before? So yeah, 4 weeks ago. So he apparently deleted his own comment. But he left some bullshit comment about how no one's listening to me, no one's paying any attention, and blah, blah, blah. I pointed out the flaw, blah, blah, blah. I've been all these perfect arguments. No, your arguments suck, and they're not on the point I'm making. And I'm spelling out the 2 plus 2 math as clearly as I can, and you're not dealing with how your bullshit undoes what is a fact. And and again, I'll draw it again, but I mean, I'll keep trying to illustrate that you just can't undo the backward momentum. The fact is that if the atom is moving and something interacts with it, it will move throughout the period of the interaction, and means that the interaction is taking place at a different location than it started, and that has a consequence. It has to make the frequency either smaller or it has to make it bigger. It has to change it. And it obviously can't change it in the smaller way, going the opposite way. So it has to be changing it in the longer way. Anyway. So he says, you missed the second and fourth paragraphs, which were vital paragraphs. I didn't miss them. I saw quote marks, and it was just basically saying, I'm not going to read the same argument again. All right, if you're going to quote your own previous argument, I already read that argument and didn't find it persuasive, so why should I read it again? And now in the other comment, he said third and fifth paragraphs. So whatever. So I'll show you the other comment that's also deleted. All right, so we'll get to this one, which seems to have the detail entity saying, oh, D, you didn't read this quoted crap. All right, so I'm not ignoring your position. I literally address it in the comment. To put it another way, imagine a row of bits again. We already did this, see? Yes, it is true that as the hydrogen atom absorbs and readmits the nth bit, it delays it and makes it further away from the n1th bit. Yeah, the point is that the first bit keeps going. So as soon as the first bit is released from the atom, it's on its way at the speed of light. And now the next bit is being held the same amount of time as this first bit was held, so that part won't matter. That's a wash. The time it's held won't matter. But the time it's held, it's moving this way. Okay? It's caught in a trap. It's essentially disappeared from the moving universe. So it's frozen. It can't move itself. And it's only going to have the motion of the thing that's trapped it. It's in a circle, it's in a trap, and now the trap can move anywhere in space, but the bit inside can't. It's trapped. It's not going anywhere. The first bit flew off. It's still leaving at the speed of light. So the whole time, okay, that this first bit is still moving, this one's in a trap, sitting there, in this bit is still in the picture. So it's moving. The first bit leaves the trap. Now the other bit is in the trap. It's going to be in the trap for the same amount of time the first bit was, so that won't change the distance. And what's going to change is that the trap is going to move this way. It's going to move further away from this first bit that's going this way. The first bit's on its way this way, going the speed of light. The second bit is going to leave from a different location, a backward location from the same location. So even though it's the same amount of time, it's not going to be the same amount of distance. So it has to be a longer wavelength between the first bit and the second bit. And then we can just forget the first bit ever happened. Now let's call the second bit the first bit, and then we'll count to the third bit, right? The same thing's going to happen. The second bit's going to leave. And the minute it leaves, the third bit's in the trap. And the third bit's going to be in the trap exactly the same amount of time the second bit was. But the second bit's moving now. The third bit's not moving. The third bit is moving backward in the trap. It's not doing any forward moving at all. It's trapped. Fuck. It's that obvious. I'll draw it, but I mean, it's that obvious. Alright. Yes, it is true that as the hydrogen atom absorbs and readmits the nth bit, it delays it and makes it further away from the first bit. Again, the delay has nothing to do with it because they both encountered the same delay. The point is while they were in the trap, everything else is still moving in the universe. However, it also makes it closer to the n plus 1's bit, whatever that means, n plus 1 bit. So we have n minus 1. You couldn't just say first, second, third, right? The n plus 1's bit. So the point is that when the second one's in the trap, the third one's still getting closer to the trap. Right? That's his argument, because the trap is moving, so it's going to get closer to the third bit. But it doesn't matter. That distance doesn't matter. Okay? The fact that the third bit's moving and the first bit are moving. So let's say the third and the first are still moving in unison, because they're moving the speed of light, while the second bit is locked in the trap of the atom. Right? That movement isn't going to have anything to do, because all that happened to each one of them. They all have to experience the delay in time. The delay in time, although it provides the opportunity for the suspension of motion, the delay in time isn't what this problem is about. The problem is about the fact that when you're in the trap, when you're in the atom, you're not going the speed of light in that direction anymore. You've stopped moving in that direction, and now you're going in this direction. Alright. After that, the atom will make that n plus 1th bit be further away from the nth bit. So you're telling me this clarifies it, right? You can't just label them 1, 2, 3, 4. But that only cancels out the moment it made them closer. But that only cancels out the moment it made them closer. It can't make anything closer because everything has to go through the trapping process, and they all get trapped for the same amount of time. So it doesn't matter when you impose the delay. If I impose the delay the minute they left their house, or I impose the delay right before quitting time at work, it doesn't matter. It's still going to have the same effect. The delay itself doesn't matter. The point is while you're in the delay, everything else is still moving, especially the guy ahead of you. The guy ahead of you, while you're not moving, is still moving. So you've got to know that he's making distance on you. Now it's going to be the same amount of distance if all we had was the delay. But we don't have just the delay. During the delay, I'm moving backwards. So I have not only the delay, I have the fact that I moved backwards while I was in delay. That means the guy who was ahead of me is not only going the distance of the delay, that speed of light for that amount of time away from me, he's also going the distance I went backwards. He's still moving. Wrong way to say it. I went backwards. That's the added distance. The amount I went backwards is the distance added to the wavelength. All right. That is exactly addressing your point about position. No, it isn't. Not ignoring anything. Yes, it does. It ignores the whole point that the objects aren't continuously moving the speed of light in a direction. When they're interacting with the atom, they lose momentum in the sense that they have no velocity, technically. Now you could say they still have velocity, but they're moving a lot of pointless directions. The whole point of drawing the circle was to point out it's a zero. You spent a lot of time moving and you didn't go anywhere. Not going anywhere is significant. If you're moving the speed of light, like the first bit is, in a straight line, you're creating distance from the other guy. If you're moving in a circle, you're not creating any distance. Shit. Alright, 3942, you say the bit is going to have to go through the same process so it can't be closer. Yes, I mean, even though the atom is moving towards, say, the third bit, it doesn't matter because the third bit's going to go through the same delay process. And it's doing it from a position that's further back. If the atom was stationary, your argument would make sense. Can't you understand? If it was stationary, you wouldn't be arguing that the frequency gets narrower, would you? I mean, if I took the hydrogen atom and I made it stationary, and I just had the thing hit it, and then go through this little loop-de-loo delay, but the atom stayed there, didn't move, you wouldn't argue that the frequency would be redshifted, would you? You'd say, no, the same frequency comes in, the same frequency comes out. And all there is a little delay in when it comes out. But it'd be exactly the same frequency. And you're saying to me that you're making this credible argument that it doesn't matter whether this thing is moving? That if it's moving with it or moving against it, wouldn't make any difference to the frequency? And I'm saying, how can you believe that? How can you believe it doesn't matter that this thing is actually moving while it's interacting and carrying the photon in a direction? Okay. So where was that? Exactly. It will just cancel out the momentary time the bit is in front of it was brought closer to it by the atom. So again, it's in real distance, it's not bringing closer, because it's still further from the target. So if you're moving closer to the third bit by the atom moving closer to the third bit, it gets to the third bit sooner, okay? It doesn't matter because it's moving away from the target. So it's a further distance from the target than if the target stayed, than if the atom stayed still, then this third bit would take longer to get to it. But the fact is, when it interacted, it would be closer to the target. It's still going to be the same away from the target by the atom moving and creating the interaction here instead of the interaction here. It doesn't make it closer to the end target. It makes it further. All right. Okay, so I read that. Arrival time is not the same as interaction time. Right. I mean, I read this, right? Is that it just cancels out the momentary time the bit is in front of it was brought closer to it by the atom. So again, it isn't brought closer to the target. All the atom is doing is moving it away from the target, which means it's got to stretch the wavelength. The position of the nth bit is further away from the first bit, but closer to the n1th bit. So again, I just can't make any sense out of that. Till the n plus 1th bit is brought further away, and it merely cancels out the momentary closeness of the nth bit. So anyway, I'll just make my counter argument to that is that'd be fine if the atom's not moving. The fact that the atom is moving and moving away from the target means it has to be creating more distance. Arrival time is not the same as interaction time. How many times am I stressing that? I mean, it is the same. The interaction time is exactly what's causing the delay. But again, the more important feature is the fact the atom has changed position while the interaction is taking place. Arrival time says you need to make the bits on the back end of the row push back by more distance. Well, clearly there is more distance. Clearly the atom is interacting further away on the 4th bit than it was on the 1st bit from the target. Then the one in the front end of the row. Looking at the effect of the hydrogen at each bit individually, you see that this is not the case unless you say the bit on the back is pushed back by more distance. It's pushed back by the fact that the atom is continuing to move further away from the target. Alright, I can't make it any clearer. Alright, so that's all there was for that. So this is the comment he removed. I mean, I think it's just kind of bullshit. If you type a comment, you gotta sort of live with it. This bullshit of just removing comments without even saying anything about why you removed it is just bullshit. Alright, so he said you missed the 3rd and 5th paragraph, which I did. Your demonstration with the hydrogen atom absorbing 2 bits, well, I would do 3 or 4 just for clarity, only works when you consider a row of bits that are close together. Well, obviously they're the distance of mere nanometers, 500 nanometers. The wavelength is the distance between the bits. But we know redshift is not the only piece of the puzzle. Says you. We don't know that redshift isn't the only piece of the puzzle. There's no other pieces to the expansion puzzle. Sorry. There's redshift and cosmic background radiation. And that doesn't even indicate expansion. So redshift is it for expansion. There is also observed time dilation. What does that have to do with it? What is the breaking of clocks? That's what time dilation is. It's just proving you can break atomic clocks. Every clock will break. You can break a sundial by just putting it out of sight of gravity. You can break a wristwatch by dumping it in water. You can break a pendulum clock by moving that out of gravity. You can break lots of clocks lots of ways. And what we found out is that atoms, you can change their metabolism, right? How fast they process decay, how fast they decay, by giving them velocity. You slow their decay down by giving them velocity. And I've sort of made the simple argument. It's going to be in one of these videos where I ask the simple question, why can't this be true? That time dilation is just multitasking. And when you multitask, you have to take resources from one place and utilize them in some other place. So you can't do what you were doing before at the same rate because you have to take time out to do something else. And in this case, move in a direction. So first I would argue time dilation has nothing to do with the subject. Second, time dilation has nothing to do with what you think it has to do with anyway. Time isn't dilated. Clocks are broken. It's that fucking simple. clocks are broken. All right. When you consider, but we know that redshift, there's also observed dilation for distant objects. So there's no observed time dilation of distant objects. That's a pile of fucking shit. See links below. There weren't any links. This means that not only does a small clump of bits get stretched, bullshit, another unproven statement for which there's no evidence, as you drew on your whiteboard. I didn't draw any fucking stretched bits, but an entire row of photons spanning millions of light years gets stretched as well. No, I never argued about any particle getting stretched. I merely argued that if you are interacting with something moving against your motion, that it will retard your frequency, the frequency of the bullets. It doesn't make the bullets bigger, doesn't make the bullets smaller, just changes the period at which the bullets arrive. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a slowdown of events. No, again, the slowdown of events isn't time being dilated. It's the fact that it takes time to have an interaction with an electron. The electron moves much slower than the speed of light, so the interaction with the electron means that while the photon's momentum is in the electron is moving much slower than the speed of light, and when the photon is released, then it's released from a retarded position. No time dilation required, no warping of any fucking non-existent time dimension, for which there's absolutely zero evidence that any such dimension exists. Alright, let's see. The entire row of photons spanning millions of light years gets stretched as well. As well! Says you, with what I would argue is zero evidence. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a slowdown of events that take place far away. So again, there's no slowdown of events. There's no evidence that any event far away is happening slower. If Bugs Bunny was jumping up and down on a black hole 7 billion light years away, we'd see him jump up and down at exactly the same rate. Fuck you, you're an idiot. Slow down events that take place far away that matches the redshift amount. Bullshit. You have no evidence of any slower events far away. According to your proposal, does the entire line of photons get more spaced out? The photons aren't being spaced out. They're being released to the world in a manner from a longer distance away, which makes the wavelength longer. If I'm on a train and I throw a bucket of paint off the back of the train, and 1 second later, right, I throw another bucket of paint off the back of the train, the distance, no, it can't be a bucket, it has to be something moving that moves the speed, that has to move 30 miles an hour. So I can't just dump buckets of paint. I have to do that off the front of the train, it'll work. But off the back of the train, the thing has to be moving. Yes, there's 1 second the difference between the bucket of paint drops. So it has to be something that moves when I drop it. But that's the fact. The fact is that it will increase Doppler shift. It's just like I said, if I'm throwing baseballs off the back of a train, right? The train's going 60 miles an hour this way, and I want to throw a baseball that's going 30 miles an hour. I have to throw it 90 miles an hour, right? You get that part, right? If I was in an airplane and I want the baseball to be caught by somebody outside the airplane, right? And that person's stationary and the plane's flying by. Well, if I want to hit that person and the plane's going 500 miles an hour and I want to hit that person, I have to throw the baseball 500 plus miles an hour to get the baseball to him. Shit. All right, where were I? All right, the entire line of okay. Does each individual clump of bits get stretched out? It doesn't get stretched out. It's at its origin, because you're moving away, you create it stretched out. It doesn't stretch out on its way. It's stretched out as you're pushing it into the universe because it's moving away. Shit. Alright. If it's the latter, then it doesn't account for time dilation. There's no accounting for time. None of these speeds have anything to do with time dilation. We can reduce the speeds to things going 50 miles an hour or 10 miles an hour. There's no reason. We don't have to use speed of light. But of course there's no fucking... I don't have to account for something that doesn't exist. Clocks break. Atomic decay can be retarded by giving something velocity. That doesn't prove there's a time dimension. If it is the former, then the exact same argument still applies. Well, whatever. So this was just another horseshit dodge, bringing up time dilation as if it has something to do with redshift, and somehow it undoes redshift. No, it doesn't. Fuck you. This is bullshit. I'm glad you deleted it. It's a stupid argument. But you should just fessed up. Oh, I made a stupid argument. I deleted it because it was stupid. Way off the subject. Alright, so I will try one more effort to illustrate. And some of it might just end up being redundant because I just don't know if I don't know if there's help for this guy. I just don't know. Oh, look at that. I didn't clean that ahead of time. And I have to maximize this when it assumes. I can do that. You don't mind a little extra work. So where the fuck's the eraser? Yeah, I should clean up when I'm done. Then I won't have to clean up. Should have learned that when I was in the restaurant business. You know, you always cleaned up the tables at night, so you didn't have to set them up in the morning. Anyway, all right. Yeah, well, it's reflections. Okay, so the idea is to understand is that all we're saying, there's a set frequency going in. These things are moving this way. Now they're going to encounter something going this way. Alright, and the something they're going to encounter is going to possess them for a period of time. So they're going to be inside of this for a period of time. And for that period of time, this thing won't be moving anymore. It'll be in a trap. Okay, I mean, where it just won't go anywhere. Alright, but this will be going somewhere. So when this falls into the trap, alright, it's going to be in there for a certain amount of time. So it won't be going where it would have been going. And when it falls in here, this is going to move to this position. And then when this is let out of the trap, it's let out of the trap from this retarded position, not from here, but from here. So it went into the trap here. It'll leave the trap back here. So it's automatically added distance. You can't deny it. It's added distance. So its release point will only be, not only will this target not get it at the right time, it's also going to get it from a point that has more distance. Just a fact. And so you can really see that with the next one. So when the next one comes in, so this is number 2, this is number 1, this is number 3. Alright, so number 1, it went in. So let's say number 1 left right here. Okay, number 1 is now going the speed of light. See, it's traveling 3 million meters a second. It's going. And it's going to keep going. And number 2 is going to fall into the trap right here, this position, right, which is further away from the target, by the way. Okay, and so number 2 falls into the trap. When it's in the trap, it isn't going anywhere, but the trap will move to here in that time. And so now number 1, the whole time 2 has been in the trap, number 1 was traveling, moving, right? So it's gaining distance. It's going further ahead. You know, it's in, like, it's a car in first place and you're in second place. and you're trying to catch up to it, well, you're not going to catch up because it's going the whole time you're in the trap. And then when you finally get out of the trap, you're going to get out of the trap way back here. All right, so you're starting from a huge disadvantage. Not huge, these are tiny amounts, but it's a disadvantage. You're not starting off from the same starting line. You're starting off from a position further back, and so you've got you can't catch up. You lost ground is the point. So now the frequency between the first one and the second one is bigger. Now the third one's going to do exactly the same thing the second one did, in the sense that I can just say now the second one leaves at the speed of light. It's out of the trap, right? Alright, so when it's out of the trap, it's moving. When it's in the trap, it's not moving. It's going in a circle. It's trapped. Alright, but the trap goes back here. So now the third one's going to leave from back here. Alright, much further from the target. More distance. And the second one left here, and it's on its way. It's out of the trap, moving, the speed of light, so it's gaining on it. And now the third one's, going to be retarded. So the frequency is going to go from, whatever this is, 30 nanometers, and it's going to go to 40 nanometers. The distance between them is going to be increased by the amount of distance this thing travels in the amount of time it takes for the photon to go through it, which is something like a tiny amount of time, right? You're talking about the distance. You're talking about like the thickness of the atom at the speed of light divided by multiplied times 0.40, 40%. Well, it's 0.60 because it's still moving 60% the speed of light. So it's a tiny amount, but as stated, over billions of light years, okay, 1 light year is how far light travels in a fucking year, which is just an insane amount of distance. And 1 billion of those is an insane amount of those light years. Yes, a lot of little atoms could be hit. I wonder if physics knows how many moles of atoms there are in, say, a hard vacuum in space. Whatever they call that. Bill Gates knows this kind of stuff because he worked at a chocolate factory. Whatever. He worked at a chip factory. Anyway, an 18 Tesla or whatever they call it, an 18 strength vacuum, Tor, I think they use the word Tor. Hard vacuum. But how many atoms are actually in that? And what would be, if you were to travel for a mile, let's say, through that vacuum, what would be your odds of hitting an atom? Do we know that from physics? Because as I understand it, NASA even engages in some speculation about creating a hydrogen collector to create a rocket that could have perpetual motion, in the sense that it could collect hydrogen atoms from empty space and use them as nuclear fuel to propel a rocket. And they engage in some speculation like they could actually build one of these things, like it's somehow possible to collect enough atoms. So there must be enough atoms out there. So when you're traveling 13 billion light years, okay, I think you might plow through a bunch of these, and that little tiny bit of distance you're going to create with each one, little tiny bit of distance, will add up to real redshift. Alright. But I can't make it really any clearer. You have to understand that the whole point of this trap is that this bit isn't doing this anymore. It's trapped. Okay, it's lost linear motion while it's in the trap, and the only motion it's going to be affected by is the motion of the trap, which will take it away from the first bit, and it'll take the third bit away from the second. And it takes the second bit away from the first bit, because the first bit's on its way. It moves the third bit away from the second bit, and just on and on. And just a fact, because this distance, this atom is moving away from the target. this distance is always increasing, always increasing. That doesn't stop. The motion that stops is the photon's motion, not the motion of the atom. All right, so I really have made a decent effort to make this understandable. And if you still can't get it, you're trying not to get it, as far as I'm concerned. It's a little bit of a... See, again, it's really a simple principle, right? These things, like just pointing out that, you can imagine yourself on a plane, and let's say you're in the front of the plane, and you throw a baseball to the back of the train. You can get that, hey, I got no problem. I can throw the baseball to the back of a train, the back of the plane. No problem at all. I can throw it 60 miles an hour. I can throw a 90-mile-an-hour fastball to the back of the plane. But you have to remember the back of the plane is also moving 500 or 350 miles an hour. Okay? So compared to the outside world, though, your baseball never went backwards. It went 275 miles an hour in the wrong direction. You think you threw it this way, but in fact, compared to dead space outside the plane, the baseball you threw as hard as you could to the back of the plane is still moving 250 miles an hour in the wrong direction. Now, see, that intuitively doesn't make any sense, but you know logically that's exactly what's happening. You can't overcome the velocity of the plane unless you throw the baseball 350 plus miles an hour. You have to throw it 350 miles an hour just to get it to stand still in space. To get it to actually move in that direction, you have to throw it faster than 350 miles an hour. And that's a truth. So I'm just saying it's the same thing. It's simple, but yeah, okay, it can get a little complicated to follow all the bouncing balls or all the bouncing bits. And it's just physics. Yeah, physics requires you to get a little bit anal and meticulous about finding every piece of motion. But if you look at the diagram simply, you can understand that the hydrogen atom is the thing in control. If I don't move it, if I leave it there, you can understand nothing changes. And if I'm moving it, that has to change something. And if I move it with it, I'm going to make the frequency smaller. If I move it against it, I'm going to make the frequency bigger. And that has to be, your logical intuition has to be saying to you, oh, I get it. I can't go by what it looks like when I throw the baseball. I have to realize I'm outside the plane as a stationary thing, and the plane's moving 350 miles an hour away. And me throwing the baseball 90 miles an hour isn't going to undo 200 or 300 miles an hour. Okay, I've done everything I can to make this understood. So if you don't get it, just fuck off. There's no hope, right? I don't think I can dissect it any further. So if you can't concede you get it, then just fuck off, because we just can't have a conversation. We just apparently don't have, we're not following the same screwdriver, wrench, pliers kind of rules. So it just won't work. My instructions just won't apply to you, because you don't get screwdriver, wrench, and pliers. So I think that's enough for the video. So till the next time and such.